Hello, and welcome to the University of Law. In today's video, I'm going to be unboxing and reviewing this, which is Doctor Who, The Last Queen of the Nile, which is the latest Fourth Doctor set, and is indeed set number 3 of Season 14, so it's the final set of the 2025 run, which I feel has been a really enjoyable run. I'm sure this was the run that was originally going to include, I've forgotten the name of it now, Something of the Sun. It was a 2020 lockdown release. It's kind of a showcase that they could record quality audio drama from home, remotely. And I'm sure that was a part of this block. I'm sure this was recorded during the lockdowns, I think. And you'll see from the cover art that we've got the Brigadier back for one of the stories. And I hope we get more of the Brigadier with the Fourth Doctor. It's been really exciting seeing that character back in the fold, especially in this era, which, the Brigadier was involved early on. There were some references towards the middle of the era, and then, the Doctor moves on. Before the Brigadier obviously came back in the 5th and 7th Doctor eras. So let's get this unboxed anyway. And of course we've got the silence in there. Let's get this unboxed. Oh, hang on. The silence are in this. Bad joke. Obvious joke to make. Yeah, so the silence are back. And I'll be talking about them in a moment because they are the first story, which isn't the one on the title. The Last Queen of the Nile is the historical story that comes next in the box, which is kind of the main feature of the set. It feels bad saying that, but because it's the two-parter, it's kind of like the main. It's the four-part of the two-disc story. It kind of feels like the main feature. I love how Big Finish vary this. You kind of, when we've had 12 episode stories across 2 sets, we've had 6 episode stories across 1 set, 7 if you can squeeze them into 1 set. We've had 2 sets of 3 episode stories. We've had 2 episodes of 4. We've had 3 kind of 1 hour stories. So there's so many ways you can do it with these box sets. Although it does look as though they're kind of moving away from the box set to the old style, like the 8th Doctor and 4th Doctor ranges used to be, that kind of the one CD look with over dark Gallifrey. Now the 13th and 9th Doctors. I'm really enjoying the way that we're getting these stories, these 9th and 13th Doctors. And I like the way that every month we're getting something from one of them. Having said that, it does mean you can't maybe tell these big stories in one piece like you can with these sets. So I think this is where I think everything has its place, I often prefer those releases because you kind of get more art, different disc art for each story, which you don't get with the box sets. But then there's story potential that you get with the box set. So, but I have done a whole video on that. So do look through the channel. There is a video where I kind of compare the 2 ways of doing it. Yes, we've got Conspiracy of Silence and The Last Queen of the Nile, the 2 stories. And Blake Ritson is in it, who of course played Adam Adamant in the Big Finish range. I've got both sets. I must do a review of those at some point, actually. I do love Adam Adamant, and it's a series I wish they'd do a kind of a remake for the television. You couldn't do a continuation. It's not like Doctor Who where you can kind of regenerate the character and continue the story like they did in 2005. With Adam Adamant, you need to redo it. But I think there's interesting there. I think you could potentially have him being Edwardian again, and him waking up 100 years or 110 years later. Or of course you could actually try having him be someone from the 60s, seeing what life is like now, which has kind of been done in other films, granted. But anyway, I digress with Adam Adamant. We only got 2 sets of that. From what I gather from Vortex magazine, I don't think it sold as well, or well enough to justify it getting a 3rd and 4th set. But they were fun. But I did prefer the original television version. I think he sadly passed back to the original actor Adam Adamant recently, actually. So, of course, we've got the usual 4th Doctor logo on the back with the font of the time. So disc 1. So let's start with disc 1. So disc 1 is Conspiracy of Silence. So Big Finish have done a few silent stories. The first, I'm sure, was a unit one about 10 years ago, actually. I'd say they've been using them more frequently of late, actually. Having said that, this was recorded 5 years ago, so perhaps while it come out soon after another one on the release calendar, it might have been that recorded and written quite separately. But yeah, so most recently they were in the classic Doctor's New Monsters set, and they were with the 7th and 8th Doctors. And I did prefer those two stories to this one. The thing with Stephen Moffat, with his creations, was whenever he brought them back, he always did something a little bit different with them. So he didn't just do the sequel, like, I love Termination and the Daleks, but it was kind of like, it would be on Now the Daleks are invading Earth, or Now they're on a time machine. There was always something different happening. Now they're building a time destructor. But Stephen Moffat takes something inherent about the creature or the villain and does something different with that, within those, kind of something within the rules and within the parameters, but then it kind of expands them. And Big Finish done a wonderful job of that, particularly with the Weeping Angels, where, every time they do it, I'm blown away by how they expand it. They've done some great 8th Doctor stuff with the Weeping Angels, but in particular, the most recent 7th Doctor story I thought was absolutely fantastic, and the chess pieces, it was a wonderful concept. And this is another one of those. In their most recent one, with the 8th Doctor, there was like a confessional, and the 8th Doctor, because obviously the silence, there's that whole idea of them being it's a religious order, so he kind of goes into this confessional, but obviously when you leave, the concept is that you've forgotten what you've said, maybe you feel lighter for having confessed. So I thought that was a really interesting concept, especially for that Doctor at that point in his life in the Time War. There's an interesting concept here, which is Johnny Morris talks in the extras about how the silence, here, it's kind of like, because you forget who they are, if you were to remember what happened to you, it would be different to what actually did happen, in the sense that there would be bits missing, a bit like with a film where you might watch an extended cut and suddenly with deleted scenes in, things make more sense. For example, I can give my own example, Back to the Future 2. There's a scene in 2015 where there's a guy who talks about the sports game, and he's clearly a younger actor that they've aged up. I remember thinking, but he's only in that scene. Why did they age that actor up when they could have just got an actor of the right age? And it turns out he was actually meant to be in some scenes from either the 50s or the 80s. I can't remember which one. But basically, with that context, that scene, at least, not a story perspective, but at least from a kind of viewer's production perspective, makes a bit more sense. So what Johnny Morris wanted to do was have a part one, which is a story, but where you kind of skip the silence, and then you repeat the story in part two where we actually see what happened. It uses, obviously, K9's mind not being a biological mind, being able to kind of see through that, and that was an interesting idea. It's a great concept, and I really appreciate it. I really appreciate them doing something with that with the silent concept. The only problem I had was, it was only when I reflected on it afterwards I appreciated what they'd been doing, and it was kind of, obviously it was almost like you were getting half the story, in the sense that you were listening to something twice, but the second time with extra bits in, and then you were kind of caught up for the finale at the end. Whereas it would have been nice to have had a sort of an hour-long story. So I really get the concept, but I think I would have liked to have seen more original stories. So yeah, I appreciate what they were doing, and I did prefer the previous silent story. Right, here's the little booklet. Here we go. Cast. And then, on the back, cast list. Yeah, I also, because of that, I also felt we didn't get as much Brigadier as I would have liked as we got in the last set, just simply because of the nature of it kind of being sort of the story was repeated, but with the bits. And as I said, it was a clever idea, very clever idea, and I get what they were getting, and I appreciate it more. But I think at the time I was kind of thinking, well, haven't I already heard this? Right, so now we come to the, as I said, the main feature is in the biggest story in the set, which is, and the title of the set, The Last Queen of the Nile, parts 1 and 2 on disc 1, and parts 3 and 4, sorry, on disc 2, and parts 3 and 4 on disc 3. And here's some other Fourth Doctor sets there. So this is written by David K. Barnes, who's a great writer. I love his stuff at Big Finish. This was really fun because obviously we've all heard the story of Mark Antony and Cleopatra, but I felt I learnt a lot more. It felt a bit like a First Doctor story, a bit like the Reign of Terror in the concept of, doesn't matter how hard you try to change things, history will always find its way. There was a kind of concept of that in the Reign of Terror, which I really enjoyed. But it was a really strong cast, really good story for Leela and for K9. Some lovely comic elements with K9. Some real moments of jeopardy, but some real deep moments and some real deep discussions. And again, obviously, Antony and Cleopatra are obviously historical figures, and we all kind of know roughly how it ends. But what's really nice about it is that they are also, in a sense, literary characters because of the amount of adaptations we've had around it. So there was a lot there to delve into and to digest and to explore, both as characters from a historical perspective and also as a literary perspective. So yeah, I really enjoyed this set as always, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they have next from the Fourth Doctor Adventures. I'd imagine that we'll get, I'm sure we're getting another 3 sets from the pre-order next year. Well, that reminds me, the one thing I did like about this is that the Doctor's got a TARDIS and can go anywhere in the universe at any time in its existence. The Doctor does go to the UK an awful lot, which obviously, it's a programme that's made by the BBC, so obviously that's the majority of the audience. However, I'd say Africa is a continent that the Doctor has visited so little across all medium, and I think especially when you think about like ancient Egypt, kind of means that everyone is really in the kind of in the consciousness of most people around the world. I'm sure learn about ancient Egypt, and it's such an engaging, interesting time. So obviously it was great that they explored it here on television. I'd love to see that. Obviously we got it this year with one of the stories, and I really hope that we kind of do more of that. There's so many civilizations, kind of before the 18th century, which I'd love them to explore in Africa. So Big Finish, if you're listening, that'd be a great thing to do, to have more stories set on the continent of Africa, and indeed a whole range of continents. South America, again, would be great to hear some more stories, because the great thing with Doctor Who, as I said, is I was aware of Antony and Cleopatra, so I know who they are, I know the basics, but actually with a 2-hour story, Doctor Who has always been there to educate and entertain, and I think I always learn a lot. And Big Finish, often I listen to them and learn about figures from history, and then I go and read a bit myself about it. And it would be great to kind of get more of that. Obviously the great textbook figures of history that we learn about. It's great to, Winston Churchill, great to be more immersed in their stories, but at the same time also showing us maybe areas of history that are less well known. And it'd be great to hear more of it on Big Finish and see more of it on television. So what do you think of this set? Do let me know in the comments below. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe, and look forward to speaking to you soon.